and they're ready for the presentations. How are we doing, Jackie?
Good. I'm about to start the WebEx recording. We're currently live on WebEx and YouTube.
All right, Dr. Weir, it's all yours.
Thank you. So good morning and welcome.
And they're ready for.
All right. So good morning and welcome. I'm Bruce Weir. Today is November 6, 2020. This meeting is being conducted via video conferencing. And I apologize up front because my video seems not to be working, but at least my audio is. Each of our members are joining us from their own location and the video is streaming on YouTube. We'll be using a roll call to conduct our business to ensure everyone's votes will be accurately recorded. And at this time, I'll ask each member to state their name and reply present as we take attendance to establish a quorum. Please take your time so the webcam switches to your location. The process will be slow, but it's important that we're all able to accurately record attendance and votes. So clearly I'm here, Bruce Weir. Dr. Beaver.
Frederick Beaver, present.
Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, present.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, present.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd.
Ken Kidd, present.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Jennifer Smith, present.
Thank you. And Dr. Souza.
Amanda Souza, present.
So we have established a quorum. So before we get started, just it's good to see everybody, even these uncertain times, and I guess we'll be meeting virtually at least for the next meeting as well. So we'll manage, and our work will continue. So you've all received an updated draft agenda for today's meeting. Is there any discussion regarding the agenda? So, can we mute that?
I'm not sure who that is.
Maybe everybody should mute when
That was Ken's phone.
It was me.
Dr. Ken. All right. So, Ken, could you mute, please? Well, yeah, there we go. There we go. Thanks. So I don't hear any discussion on the agenda. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda for this meeting?
I move to approve the agenda. This is Amanda Souza.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Souza. And do I have a second?
Fred Beaver, second.
Second, Allison Eastman.
Thank you. Dr. Souza and Dr. Beaver just beat you to that. So I'll call upon your vote. At that point, please state your vote. So to approve the agenda, my vote is aye. Dr. Beaver.
Fred Beaver, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd.
Ken Kidd, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Jennifer Smith, aye.
Thank you. And Dr. Souza.
Amanda Souza, aye.
Thank you. So we have approved the agenda. So now you've all received draft minutes from the August 13, 2020 meeting. Is there any discussion regarding these minutes? We've both had a chance to look at them. I've looked at them. They seemed fine.
There was just one thing, the last paragraph.
Okay. This is Dr. Eastman. So, all right.
It's just, you need to delete B from the first sentence.
Okay.
The chair stated that the next meeting of the subcommittee will take place virtually. So there's a B in front of it.
All right. Thank you. Any other discussion? Thanks, Alison. Any other discussion on the so, Dr. Eastman, I'll entertain a motion from you to approve the minutes with that small typo correction. Thank you. Would you just say yes? You're nodded. Can you just say yes?
Yeah.
Thank you. And a second to the approval of the minutes.
Ken Kidd, second.
Thank you. All right. So again, I'll call for your to vote on this issue. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver.
Fred Beaver, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings?
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd?
Ken Kidd, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Jennifer Smith, aye.
Thank you. And Dr. Souza?
Amanda Sozer, aye.
Thank you. So the vote is to approve the minutes as presented with that small typo error at the end. Yeah. All right. So we'll move into the business. Under the accreditation and laboratory updates, Erie County has supplied a letter of submission. This is for informational purposes. No vote is required. The lab had a virtual QAS in September. They have submitted the audit documentation to INDIS. The lab received no findings. Tom Grill is available. Do we have any comments or questions about this Erie County?
No.
Okay.
I have a general, I think we have 4 different audit documents in here and there are no findings on any of them. So I was just wondering if everybody, how do we feel about the virtual audits? Do we think that they're, and maybe we can talk about that later, but I don't know if anybody has any concerns about the virtual audits, considering there are no findings on any of them.
I have some comments about them, but it's more in the general of, because this is the new audit document, and I'm finding there are a lot of not applicables, particularly for the validation studies, which you have a list of validation studies, and none of them are applicable under Standard 8 because the studies were completed after. This is, I was going to go to this when we get to Westchester County in particular. But there's, everything is not applicable under Standard 8 for internal validation, yet an internal validation was done. And so I went to the guidance document, and the guidance document says that those should be reviewed under the 2011 audit document, yet we don't have a 2011 audit document that shows that they were reviewed under that document. So what I did is I contacted the help desk, the QAS help desk, to inquire about that, about how they do this, because it looks very odd when everything's not applicable, yet you've got like 5 validation studies. I haven't heard back from them. They usually respond within 12 hours, but I haven't heard anything. It was 2 days ago that I inquired. And this is a general thing. It's also people who are training between the time that, or before the time that the old, let's see, how did it go? Some of the training documents were reviewed and not applicable because they didn't have to meet the new standards because of the timing of their hire date. So they're supposed to be reviewed under the old document, but we get nothing about the old document or any indication that the auditors are using the old document for those people who fall in this little gap. That's just my general comment about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm concerned about, is that this is the first time we're seeing this new audit document and it's all virtual audits at the same time. So, and maybe that's something to ask each of the labs or what their impression of it is. I mean, it's certainly possible to have a no finding audit, but we want to make sure that these are adequate, I guess.
So
and that there aren't issues with the new document. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Catherine. So we've got 2 separate issues. You first discussed the issue of having a virtual, and then we've got the issue of which audit policies we're following. Should we just take out the virtual audit situation first? So, Dr. Gettings, do you have an overall concern or a particular concern with any of the virtual audits? Is the procedure a concern to you?
I guess it'd be nice to hear from the labs what their perspective on it is. I mean, it's certainly a good thing to have an audit with no findings, but do they feel that this is as adequate? And I don't know that there's anything to be done about it anyway, but is there any reason to worry that these are not sufficient audits?
Right.
This is Jennifer, and we just went through this, and I can tell you we fought very hard with ANAB to try to get them to come here. We actually had 2 audits during this pandemic. One, they were able to send people, and we had them here for a week, and then our next audit was virtual in August, and it's impossible. I mean, with all the travel restrictions in DC, it was hitting us both directions. And so we did a virtual audit. We tried to make it as live as possible. We had meetings and they reviewed everything. And at the end of the day, it's a lot of paperwork review anyway. And I actually feel like they gave us a thorough scrubbing under the conditions where, I mean, we just couldn't get people here. It wasn't going to happen. There's too much travel restrictions on everybody's side. My mayor won't let people in without a test, and we just couldn't do it. So I think we can't put the labs in a position where they really can't get from underneath it. But I do think it's thorough. I mean, I want to say, yeah, when people are in your lab, you feel like it's more thorough, but it's just like our meetings are now virtual. I don't feel like my meetings are less effective. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We've actually been through it. And then I'm going to have my unit manager come up and I'll ask her a couple of questions about the new regs, the new standards.
Jennifer, can I ask a question? How does it run? Does it run like a normal audit and people are doing it all day? So they're just doing it from their homes versus being in the conference room where they would be?
Exactly. So you upload all your documents and then they review the documents. And then we actually had virtual interviews. We even had, I think for some parts, we had like a GoPro where we set it up where they could kind of look over their shoulders. I mean, we tried to make it as, real as possible, but I hear you. We wanted, and I bet the Labs on the Line probably wanted them to come, but it was just impossible. And then they were struggling with even getting auditors because of the world is kind of a mess. So I think it's better to do this than pass. Because, CLIA in our public health lab side, we can't even get them to come, right? So we're kind of on hold in our CLIA certifications and they're extending them every 6 months. And personally, I'd rather have this measure, but I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think we all feel better when people are in our labs looking at us. But for now, I felt ours was very thorough. And and then the trick with the new standards, I think I'm looking at all this going, well, it's NA. What's the point of the boxes? But having sat in some of the discussions, here we are with these new standards. Now we have to live with them.
So thanks, Jennifer. So that was helpful, but the issue is, do you want to hear from each of the labs?
So there is someone who does want to speak from Onondaga, but I also just want to chime in from the New York perspective because having spoken to several of the laboratories, they are extremely thorough. In fact, some of them had the laptops on a cart, literally rolling them around the laboratory and seeing them perform live. So, I want to say that I've spoken to a couple of folks and they say that it was extremely thorough, but I will, Bruce, if you'd like to recognize caller number 2, they're from Onondaga, I believe.
But that's not the one we're talking about at the moment. Although, is it okay? Anybody else have an opinion? I'm happy to do that. Have this caller just to address the issue and regard.
Can I make a comment? Also, I perform at least one QAS audit to a laboratory a year. I think I've been doing pretty well as an auditor. At least pitching in. And I personally, when I have a finding, it's usually because I saw them doing stuff that wasn't following their protocols. So when I do like a side-by-side with somebody or just a walkthrough or, just observing, but, not making not wheeling a computer around or anything, but when I'm in the laboratory and I just happen to be casually, looking at things, probably pretty much every time I have a finding, it's because somebody is doing something that is not following their protocol. And it requires you to observe it in person, not do it in a, through a WebEx or something like that. But it's not the laboratory's fault. This is the best you can do. It's better than nothing.
So do I have any other comments about whether we should listen to this caller? it might be helpful. So we sort of heard from Dr. Smith, which was very helpful. Dr. Ken, were you about to say something?
Or one thing I was maybe perhaps wait until it's their agenda item as well,
Yeah.
and let Tom Grohl speak to their laboratory at this time.
Yeah, I don't want to get into a long series of phone calls if we can help it, but maybe we should do one. But it is Erie County here, so let's have Tom. If he's there, let's just have him speak very quickly. And who would like to address him? I mean, I can try and summarize out I think what we're trying to do is to get the lab's perspective on how they felt the audit went, given that it was virtual. Did they feel it was any less of an audit? So we're just waiting on Tom Grohl, is that right?
Hi, this is Tom.
Hi, Tom. It's Bruce Weir. Thanks very much for calling in. So, as you know, you had a virtual audit recently, and the committee's just curious to know your perspectives from the lab's perspective. How did the audit go, given that it was virtual? Do you feel it was an accurate representation of the quality of the work at your lab?
I thought the audit went well. I did think they did a very thorough job. It was a lot of scanning. They did virtual interviews with us, and they also did some watching of the analysts in the lab. Of course, it was all virtual, but overall, I thought it was thorough and it was good.
Okay. Any other of the committee members have a question for Tom?
Not me.
Good. Okay. Well, thanks, Tom. It's reassuring to hear your perspective. It's never going to be quite as good, obviously, as being in person, but it is what it is. We're all living under constraints at the moment. So I think, I take it that the committee can be assured that the lab at least was satisfied with the conduct of the audit.
Yes, we were.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, thanks for calling.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm not sure. So on the virtual issue, I'm not sure that there's anything we can do. Do you want to spend a few minutes talking about this issue of which audit policies are in place at the time, and if you're concerned, what's the remedy? So I'll go back to you, Alison.
For me, I'm waiting to hear from the QAS help desk, because for those, for example, validation studies or review of training documents for new employees, or getting their first review of their qualifications and training. To get NA, I'm curious. According to the guidance document, they're supposed to be reviewed under the 2011 version. I tried to find a fillable 2011 version. It's no longer at I couldn't find one at the FBI website or at SWGDAN even. I think they pulled it off. But I wanted to ask them, I mean, what are they accepting to be satisfied that the training and qualifications and methodologies and so forth for newly validated procedures that are being used that received an NA on the new document, are they satisfied that somebody reviewed those things under the 2011 document? Because we don't get a package with the 2011 document with checkoffs for the things that were reviewed that didn't qualify for review on the 2020. So I'm just waiting to hear back from the help desk. And I had another question for them, and they got back to me within 2 hours. But now I'm waiting a longer time, so I'm curious whether maybe they needed to go upstream a little bit to get an answer.
So that's confusing, isn't it? Anybody else have thoughts about this issue? I must say I'm quite confused. Which policies are in effect now? And you're saying it's 2011. Why isn't it 2020? I'm sorry, I just don't understand.
It depends on when something was done. And I was going to really bring it up when I think it was the Westchester County lab had many validations on their in their appendix. I'm pretty sure it was Westchester County. Yeah, it was. But they got NAs for under standard 8 for a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm like, well, look at all these validations. So that's where I looked and I saw that those validations should have been, because of the timing that they were done, approved by the technical leader, that they would have fallen under the 2011 audit document. And they should have been reviewed against it during their external audit. And I'm curious whether they were, because we don't have any indication that they were.
But during the 2020 audit, was the NA designation appropriate or not?
We can ask them when we get to their item and see what their assessors decided to go with and how they interpret it, because as you know, there are different assessment teams for everyone. So they're coming up in a few.
Okay, all righty. Thank you. It sounds a little confusing. So I think that's all we need to do about Erie County. Is that correct, Jill? I think so. We can move on to Monroe County. So we have a letter, a submission. The Monroe County also had a virtual QAS in September. They've submitted the audit documentation to Indus, received no findings. Any comments other than the one that Alison's just raised? Any comments about Monroe County?
I do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Gail Conklin is on. If she could just raise her hand and we'll unmute her accordingly.
Is she there?
She is here. We're just waiting. Sorry. She has to press *3, correct?
Yes, that's right. Oh, there she is.
There we go. Thank you.
Hi, Gail.
To go.
Sorry, good morning. This is Gail Conklin.
Hi, Gail. This is Allison. I had a couple of questions. Under standard 7 and 6.8, you got a not applicable. And this is on page 96 of your audit document. The reviewer says 6.7 and 6.8 and all of the substandards were laboratory does not interpret legacy data. So you don't interpret. What if you get a hit on an old chemistry?
So what we have written into our quality manual is that at the current time, no one is qualified to perform review of legacy data. It hasn't come up as an issue yet. What we would do at that point, we have scanned our validations and we would require the analyst to read the validations, and then I would, at that point, would give them a competency test. So we do not have, so that we don't have to keep renewing this competence, we have just made it a policy that if this became necessary, we would do the required steps to become competent.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure on that. And then one other thing on the document, this would be on page 112, standard 9.10.5.1C. Under mixtures, there's no box checked. And I'm assuming
okay.
Yes,
I did not see that.
Allison, can you give us a page number for the materials on that one, please?
Page 112, the red number.
Thank you.
I assume at this point I would probably need to notify NAB that is missing. When I reviewed the document, I didn't notice that.
Oh, that's fine. they can fix it and send us a revised page. That was all I had.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Any questions from the other committee members? For Gail Conklin. Okay, thank you. So thanks very much, Gail, for calling in. Appreciate your answers.
Thank you.
All right, so I think any other comments on the Monroe County reports? All right, so we can move on to Onondaga County, and I take it here we would like. I don't have a name showing us. Do we have someone from Onondaga County?
Yes, I do.
So could we have them join us? Well, just Dr. Eastman, this was this. So you would like to press the issue here? Is that right?
No.
Okay.
But I had a couple.
You were breaking up. Sorry. Could you say that again?
I had a couple questions, or actually comments.
Okay. So you would like someone on the line?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Go ahead, Jill.
Hi, this is Kathy Hum from Onondaga County.
Okay. Welcome to the call. So Dr. Eastman has a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
Hi, Kathy. All right. So this is one of the. I ended up contacting the QAS help desk just to inquire about these two standards. You have on 8.2, on 8.2, you have marked not applicable. Okay, that's on page 164 of our document. And that standard is, have developmental validation studies preceded the use of any new methods implemented for forensic DNA analysis since the last external audit?
Yes.
And then.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt.
They said that 8.2 should be marked yes.
Our understanding and interpretation of that standard was that it would apply to any new methods implemented since the last external audit, which we did not have any of. So I believe that is why that is checked as not applicable.
Okay.
Not applicable for us.
Then let's go down to 8.2.2. Are peer-reviewed publications of the underlying scientific principles of a method available? They said that you marked yes. That's for any methods that you have going on in the laboratory.
Okay, I think once again we had interpreted that as new methodology that had been implemented since the last audit, and I believe that that's also how the auditor had, our external auditor who did our audit interpreted that as well, but we can certainly look into that.
Yeah, I'll pull up the, I probably don't have it readily available. I can send in the response that they gave me, or just, you can contact the help desk, the QAS help desk at FBI. Whatever, I think it. Have you ever communicated with them?
Yes, I believe that was possibly the email address that we used when we had to possibly ask for the approval of the external virtual audit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I think they were helping out when everybody was doing their 2020 audit document training. But yeah, check into that, because they told me that should be marked yes, but that's just your basic library for, all the methods that you use, that you can reference library.
Okay, we will look into that. We will reach out to them.
Hey, Allison,
I would interpret that as it's new, like if 8.2.2 looks like it falls under 8.2, which is for any new methods. I would think if it was general, it would be an 8.3.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 165. No, I'm on page 164. And 5, both. I'm looking at both of them.
Yeah, I think the key is the note.
Yeah.
Read the note. And I think the purpose may have been at the time to not ask people to have auditors continue to review over and over and over again. Because the problem is if a lab puts yes there, then an auditor actually has to go in and review those in theory. So it seems like the note, maybe the help desk, I mean, they're sending conflicting information because the note is pretty clear to me.
Yeah, because I mentioned to them that I normally not applicable did. And they said, I don't know who it is, but the help desk said it should be yes. So
yeah,
I would think it would be a separate standard, like a new 8 point whatever, not 8.2.2. Like Mandy had said, it would stem from that specific criteria. And again, the note is of importance at the beginning of 8.2.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, I'm also trained in both the old and the new QAS versions of the audit as a qualified auditor, and my interpretation of 8.2.2 that it was a substandard of 8.2, which would apply to new methodology. Once again, I don't mind looking into it, but that was my interpretation of that standard, and for what that's worth.
Yeah, and the reason why this stood out to me is because it's different on everybody else's audit document. I think everybody else marked.
I think that was also in part, obviously I don't know what other labs have done since their last external, but in particular for us, we did not have any new validations or methodology brought on since our last external audit.
Okay.
So anything else, Alison?
That was the only question I had. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Sorry. 9.10.5.2. That's on page 177. This sounds really picky, but there's a typewritten X in there. Who did that? It's not.
Which page?
That would have been the auditor. We did not have the ability to make any changes to our document because we were only provided PDF, locked PDF versions for our review. So that was, for some reason, I did actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. I noticed that as well. I don't know why the font's different. It was all electronically provided to us, but we did not make that edit. That was from the external QAS auditor.
Okay. All right. That was all I had.
Okay, thank you. So thanks very much for calling, and we appreciate you.
I guess actually, if we could make a comment about our thoughts of how the external audit went.
Please.
So we actually thought that it was extremely thorough. In general, our whole assessment, not just our QAS audit, we had a full assessment that occurs every 4 years that was completed virtually due to the pandemic and people not being able to travel into New York State. Our thoughts were that the auditors, the assessors were extremely thorough. They had our documents far in advance from when they normally would, since they would normally not receive our, copies of case files until they came on site during the week of the audit. So they had that like 2-3 weeks in advance, actually closer to, for our policies and procedures, they had that, in excess of a month in advance, which I guess is not abnormal for that part. But we thought that they were extremely thorough. They actually performed more witnessing and interviews than they normally would have had the opportunity to on site. We had like 3 or 4 as opposed to they would maybe normally do 1 or 2 interviews. Maybe they had to do 1 witnessing event for the ANAB requirement, but they actually did several, and that was for all disciplines, not just DNA. So we actually thought It was extremely thorough. We had a lot of communication with all of the assessors, including the person that completed the QAS audit for us. And so we really thought that there was no change, if not anything. We thought it was actually more thorough due to them being able to complete it, the audit and the assessment off-site, and had more time to do that in the weeks prior. And I would also say a couple of other things. You know, the fact that we had no findings for our last several external audits, we have had no findings. So we don't feel that that's a reflection of the thoroughness of the external audit that we had this time. And in addition, I just would add that I'm a qualified QAS auditor, and I'm about to also participate in an external assessment for a different laboratory system. And I can tell you that on that end, there's a lot of preparation and a lot of review done in advance that is equal to, and probably, if not more so, than at the time of the audit that I would have been able to do if it was on site. So I would say there's absolutely no deficiency with it being virtual, at least with our experience.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. We appreciate your experience and your information. So thanks very much for calling in.
Okay, so no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other discussion on the Onondaga County?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in, I just looked at our recent audit documents, and we have NAs there in that section too. And Clark Jaws, our new technical leader, and he came from the Bureau and worked on all the QAS stuff. So he's going to look into the help desk issues. But I just wanted to throw that in. We were just audited in August.
Thank you. So I think we need to move along. So do I have a motion to issue a binding recommendation to the Commission on Forensic Science to receive the New York State accreditation for the Onondaga County Center for Forensic Sciences in the discipline of biology for the time period concurrent with its ANAB accreditation through January 31, 2025? Do I have a motion?
So moved. Catherine Gettings.
Gettings, thank you. And a second?
A second, Allison Eastman.
Eastman, all right, thank you. I'll call upon your vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver?
Fred Beaver, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman?
Dr. Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings?
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd?
Ken Kidd, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Aye.
Thank you. And Dr. Souza?
Amanda Souza, aye.
Thank you. And I'm pleased to announce you can now see me, so I am here. I unplugged my camera, then plugged it back in. Who knew? So moving along, Suffolk County. So Suffolk County had an off-site surveillance visit in August, received no findings, and the lab is in compliance with its accreditation standards. Any comments on the Suffolk County reports?
Can I go back to Onondaga County for a second?
Just briefly.
Just to congratulate Kathleen Corrado on her retirement.
Ah, yes, thank you. Most appropriate. And
I'd like to second that.
And Dr. Dooley, can you help us prepare a letter for her? That's significant. Thanks very much. That's very nice. Great. All right. So back on Suffolk County, I think nothing for us to do. So is that right? Somebody has a comment?
Actually, I have some questions.
I'm sorry. I thought I called for questions. Oh, go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm back on validation. This is an internal assessment or audit.
Well, see, this is
what
an
I
offsite.
wanted to know is somebody from Suffolk County here? I have a couple of questions.
Do we have anybody from Suffolk?
Connie, you're all set to speak.
Hi, this is Helen Wong from Suffolk County.
Hi, this is Allison. I have a question about standard 8.2.1. Did you do a developmental validation?
We did not. So we included our STAR mix validation for the internal audit this year, and us reading this validation, we just thought if the manufacturer did a developmental validation, we should mark these how they did it.
I think these all should be marked not applicable. It's referring to whether you did a developmental validation.
Please call the tax office. Please call the tax office. Sorry about that. Okay. So for all standards 8.2, we should mark this as NA.
Your validation was an internal. The developmental was in 2016.
Correct.
Well, the first developmental, I think. First version. Yeah. So you would do for your star mix validation would be under internal validation.
That is correct.
I mean, that's my only comment there.
Okay.
Allison, I think that might be interesting to get clarification on that, because if it's, yeah, I think it would be interesting to say if it's been done by someone else, is that marked yes or no? I would think that if it was, was a developmental validation done, they probably want to just document that.
This is the first time I've ever seen anybody fill this section out.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Allison, I'm going to briefly try to get into the guidance document and give you an answer, hopefully a bit.
I can't wait till the 2020 QAS document becomes routine.
Hello, everyone. Sorry to interrupt, but apparently I've been on mute this entire time. It's Natasha. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome, Natasha. Good to
awesome.
Thank you. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Thank you.
I just had one comment, but you guys couldn't hear me. I've been trying to tell you. From the last motion, I heard Dr. Weir say, the motion to for the commission to receive and not renew the binding recommendation. That's the only thing I heard.
I think I said.
To clarify.
I thought I said, do I have a motion to issue a binding recommendation to the commission to renew the New York State accreditation? Did I not say that?
To me, it's like you said receive it. That's why I want to clarify. That's all.
My apologies. I thought I had said renew. It should have been renew.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. And the motion did pass. I should have said that. Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm losing my place. we are now, we're finished Suffolk County. We're now on Westchester. Oh, have we finished Suffolk County, Alison?
We're on Suffolk County.
Yeah, we're on Suffolk County. So did you have further questions? I mean, I'm not sure what the consequences of your question are, to be honest, for this report.
Allison, this is Helen from Suffolk. How about we reach out to the CODIS help desk and see if they would be able to guide us further, and if we do need to correct the document, we can.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay, thank you.
I would love to know how this is supposed to be done.
Thank you. Any further questions, Alison, for Suffolk County?
Let's see. Yeah, I guess, and again, it's the confusion over developmental validation. It's 8.8.1.3.
Could you just give us a page number each time you refer to a section on our document?
This is page 248.
Thank you.
This is under, what is the main? Okay, would be it. And again, it's inquiring, do the developmental software validation studies for new software or new modules of existing software for the analysis and or interpretation of data include, again, I think this should be not applicable because you didn't do the developmental validation.
Okay, I'll also make sure I include this when I ask them for guidance.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks for calling in. That's great. All right. So any other comments about the Suffolk County reports? All right. Thank you. So let's move on then to Westchester County. And I've got, so they also had a virtual QAS conducted. Received a report. There were 2 findings, none related to the DNA section. The lab submitted its corrective action plan to A&AB. The lab has also received and submitted its external QAS to ENDA, so there were no findings. And there's a new lab director, Lydia De Castro. Dr. De Castro is available. Do we have any questions or comments about Westchester County?
And this is where I noticed where there were all the not applicables, and there were a lot of validation studies that were reviewed. If Westchester County, how they felt about that, or did they discuss this with the auditor? Or
Dr. Corrado, if you could just press *3, we'll unmute you and you can speak.
And before we go to that, Allison, I just want to go back to Suffolk County because I think in those developmental validations, I think they should be NA because there are no approved validations in that audit document.
Right.
I mean, I would feel differently if there were validations that they were looking at, and then they'd say, were there developmental validations associated with the validations that we reviewed? But in Suffolk, there were no validations. Okay. Sorry, just wanted to interject before we got too far down.
All right. So do we have Westchester County on the line now?
Yes, this is Elaine Schwartz. I'm the supervisor of the section. I also have Alana Laureano, the technical leader, and I have our new lab director, Lydia De Castro.
Thanks very much. So Dr. Eastman, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Elaine. Again, my comment is about all the not applicables with regards to the validation studies, and it's because they fell in that gap between the 2011 document and the 2020 document. How did the auditors review your all those validations? Did they pull out a 2011 document to review them?
Okay, so we did not realize that we were going to have NAs on those validations until they sent us the audit document back for review. And then we posed a question to ANAB regarding this. And I have an email from them which I could read to you how they responded.
That's good.
Okay, so the question we asked was, for all the validations that were approved, should there be a note about them being approved against the 2011 QAS standards, since the 2020 QAS standards did not apply? And their answer was, per QAS guidance, additional validation requirements specified in Standard 8 and effective July 1st, 2020 are applicable to validations completed on or after July 1st, 2020. Validations summarized after September 1st, 2011 and prior to July 1st, 2020 will need to be evaluated against the 2011 QAS. There is no obligation to write in that they were approved against the 2011 QAS standards. And this was sent to us by Jill Spriggs from ANAB, not one of our auditors.
So they don't, could you go back and?
That sounds fairly,
last part?
it sounds fairly clear. But go ahead and reread it. Thank you.
Would you like me to reread the answer?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Not the whole
As per,
thing, what ANAB said.
Okay.
Let her read the document.
they said per QAS guidance, additional validation requirements specified in Standard 8 and effective July 1st, 2020 are applicable to validations completed on or after July 1st, 2020. Validations summarized after September 1st, 2011 and prior to July 1st, 2020 will need to be evaluated against the 2011 QAS. There is no obligation to write in that they were approved against the 2011 QAS standards.
Okay.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Alison, do you have other questions about the report?
That was the only thing.
Thank you.
I have a comment. I mean, how do we know that they were reviewed under any kind of audit? So, I mean, that just totally doesn't make sense. I think it would be really helpful to hear from the FBI on this.
I agree, Allison.
So what's the procedure there? Jill, can you help us? How do we proceed in this situation?
We can extend an invite for them to speak, or we can formalize questions in a letter form and have them respond. I think that might be the best method to go, just based on availability. So if you would like to lay out your questions and have a motion in which to send the letter to the FBI, then we can do that.
And before we do it formally, Alison, would you be happy to draft a letter? Maybe have other committee members look over it before it goes off. You'd be willing to do it? Okay. So, Alison, how about I'll entertain a motion.
A second. Could I have a copy of that letter?
This is Elaine again. Yes, we did send that to DCJS.
Okay. All right. Great.
Thank you. So this would certainly help to have things clarified. I agree. So, can you frame a motion, Alison, or do you want me to try and do it for you?
Would you do it for me?
So I'll entertain a motion that the DNA subcommittee asks the FBI to provide a ruling on I'm not quite sure how to word this, a ruling on the issue of the applicable standards for auditing I have to have help with the wording. You can help with the 2011 standards to be adhered to in audits after July 1, 2020 for those particular issues, right?
For audit.
This is audits that took place after July 1st, 2020, but concerning issues that.
No, that's not right, is it? It's clarification on how to document the audit of the validations that were performed prior to the 2020 document going into effect, but not reviewed in an audit prior to that time. Is that right, Allison?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think it's going to end up being more than just it might be review of training documents. You know, I didn't make a list of all the things where an NA would happen because of the gap.
Yeah, and the letter that she read was interesting because it starts out by saying that new standards in 2020 aren't going to apply to things done beforehand, which makes sense. And so maybe those are the things that should be marked not applicable. But everything that's carried over from 2011 could be marked yes or no, right, on this document. So it seems like maybe there's some miscommunication or misinterpretation of guidance.
I don't think we can. I don't think we can crystallize this in a letter following this discussion. So it might be that having the FBI call in at our next meeting might be the fastest way to do it. I think there are so many issues here, as you say. I'm not sure that a letter would actually do it. You know, do you agree that we ask an appropriate FBI person to join us in the February meeting to discuss?
That sounds even better.
And by all means, communicate, I guess, via Jill, the kind of issues that we would like him or her to discuss at that time. So yeah. So thank you. I think this is important, and I don't think we're in a position to solve it today, or even to articulate exactly all that's involved. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Just want to be clear that there's not going to be a motion to draft a letter, and that you would just like me to reach out and extend an invitation for them to come and speak at the next meeting.
Yes, I would like maybe give them a heads up now, but closer to that time, we'll try and formulate some questions as best we can. I mean, for Dr. Reisman, and maybe Dr. Kidd can join you, and Dr. Giddings also. I think we've got a general sense, but I think there are so many issues that I think it's going to be much faster to do it verbally. Yeah.
I can also, I'm sorry. I can also provide guidance that has been provided to the laboratories. We'll pull together the different guidance that's been provided at various meetings and share that. Because I think the other issue is sometimes you may do validation studies, but because you don't have it online, you haven't submitted it for review. And that if these studies are falling in a gap, when in other words, the standards aren't retroactive when you did your studies. So I think that's part of the layer that's also involved in this.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, so very interesting. So let's move on to the Nassau County Surveillance Assessment Report. The lab had a remote surveillance visit in October, received no findings. Comments or questions on the Nassau County situation?
Dr. Weir?
Yes.
Hi, it's Natasha. I can't get off unmute. So going back, you said there's not going to be a motion, but you want to extend an invitation to the FBI. But closer to the meeting, you want to pose questions for them?
I think so, yes. I would like.
If that's what you want to do on behalf of the DNA, I think that needs a motion. That's what you guys want to do. As a committee, you want to have questions for them.
Okay, thank you. So that's helpful. So I don't think we're in a position to articulate the questions. That was my concern today. It's not clear to me that we actually conduct business between meetings. So this was I'm looking for a discussion with the FBI, but some framework. I mean, it could simply be the framework concerning. I don't know quite how to say it.
I guess I would say evaluation of documentation that spans the different versions of the audit documents.
Thank you. So that might be sufficient.
If other people think that's fair.
That might be sufficient. Yeah. And then before the next meeting, if each of us will articulate for ourselves the questions we want to address, and I think those would be clear. But I think a conversation will be much more productive with someone in a position to provide definitive answers. We are certainly. It appears to me that we're getting conflicting advice from different sources. And is the FBI the ultimate arbiter in this issue?
I think that's a good idea.
I think it'll be helpful in reviewing the documents that we have to get that clarification.
Yeah. And my question was, is the FBI the appropriate person to make a definitive guidance?
They would issue the guidance, but it's ANAB who's actually implementing the guidance, right? So if we get clarification from the FBI that differs from what ANAB is doing, then I think we then need to follow up with ANAB, right?
Do you want to have them both at our next meeting, one after the other?
I mean, it's the FBI who ultimately approved to continue participating in NDIS. based on their, their QAS results, audit results. So I think it would really be important for them, and the document was developed by SWGDAM, which is an advisory group to the FBI. So I think the FBI would be the ultimate person to say how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, I agree with that, Allison, but it's ANAB and telling their auditors how to fill out the document, right? Like, that's where I'm wondering if the miscommunication happened between the FBI and ANAB.
But the actual training for the audit document was it? Well, it might have been ANAB, but it was the FBI help desk that also helped resolve issues with the training. So I think both of them, because one ultimately approves it for Endis participation. The other one is responsible for sending the auditors out. I think they both better be on the same page.
Is there agreement that we ask them both? Do you want them both on the line at the same time or sequentially? We're not trying to set up a confrontation. I don't think that's good.
No. I mean, it might be good to have a group discussion on this.
Natasha, yes.
Dr. Weir, I'm sorry. Caller 16 has raised their hand. I'm not sure who that is. So if we could just identify who that is, who might be able to add to the discussion. If not, then we will quickly mute you and move on with the request for ANAB and FBI to be present. So caller 16.
It might be Karen Dooling. I don't know if I'm caller 16.
You are
but
caller
I'm up
16.
For NASA. Okay,
Oh, so
I'm
you're
up
up
for
next.
NASA. That's why I asked to be unmuted in case there were questions.
Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, so Natasha, I hope we're doing the right thing here, that the committee's asked Dr. Dooley to request the FBI and ANAB to join our next call to discuss the issues, and as clearly articulated by Dr. Gittings. I'm going to mangle it if I try. Thank you. Very interesting. So so we were talking about Nassau County. I guess further discussion sort of moved. Is that right, Dr. Allison, Dr. Eastman? You didn't have any other questions for Nassau County?
No, that was the only.
Sure. Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, that was an interesting series of discussions. So we're moving along. Old business. Dr. Dooley, do you have an update regarding the partial match program?
I do. Again, there have been no additional submissions for the partial match program. 93 names requested. 49 names have been released, and all 49 investigations are now closed.
Thank you. Questions for anybody on hold?
Bruce, I'd like to go back to the document itself and make a couple of comments.
Which document?
The audit document.
Oh, okay.
I found it, as someone who does not run a DNA forensic lab, the distinction between technician as distinct from an analyst is something that I had trouble with. I also found that many of the questions were a little ambiguous, and 5.6 in particular is grammatically incorrect and makes no sense. I'm just concerned that this is not an adequate document. That's maybe trivial, but I wanted to get it on the record.
Thank you. Is this something that would be appropriately addressed to the FBI and ANAB when they join us? I mean, whose document is it in the final analysis? It's an ANAB document, is that right?
No, it's the FBI's document.
It's an FBI document. So I think your comments are noted, Ken. So let's please bring that up when we have the FBI joining us.
I think to that, I guess I would say that there is a public comment period on these documents before they're released. And so that's really the time when people like us should be looking at them and giving feedback.
Right.
I don't know how they would receive it. I mean, I think it's fine to give them feedback now, but I don't think that anything is going to be changed in this document at this point until the next revision comes out.
Okay.
I guess the only changes they can make is in the discussion statutes. So.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. I think we need to move on. Dr. Doody, can you give us an update regarding Familial Search program?
Yes, in terms of Familial Search, we have 36 applications in total, and that includes 6 resubmissions and 1 renewal. 23 of those have been approved, 12 rejected, 2 withdrawn, and we have none pending approval currently. Of the 23 that have been approved, we still have 8 in queue or in process, and 15 have been completed.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So do we have an update regarding from Estes regarding the CODIS bulletins? And I think Tom Leach was available. Maybe Tom, you could join us.
Tom, I believe you're unmuted.
You got Karen again.
I think it's Suffolk. I'm sorry. I'll lower my hand.
Karen, if you could also just press *3, I think that lowers your hand. And then we'll know if Tom's on the line.
Okay, hi Tom, it's Bruce here. So any updates on CODIS bulletins for us?
Good morning, this is Tom Leach, Associate Director up at the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center. There is no new updates regarding the CODIS bulletin.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Sorry to bother you. So I think we need to move on. The next item is the barge letter. We received a letter from Commissioner Green asking us to consider the issue. Someone needs to be. We have a letter from Commissioner Green asking us to provide the Commissioner a written explanation as whether further action is required by the subcommittee or the Commission regarding the issue of a star mix and the highest posterior density. We subsequently got a letter from, at the request of Commissioner Green, we got a letter from Commissioner Loftus articulating a series of questions that he thought were necessary to be addressed. And we had a brief discussion at our last meeting. Dr. Buckleton joined us. At that time, we took no action. So now we have formal requests for action. So let me open the floor for discussion if anybody would like to offer some thoughts about this issue. I certainly found the discussion at the Commission meeting, the one on video from their last meeting, was informative. There seems to be some difference of opinion. So I think agreement that the star mix developers were acted appropriately in informing people. They found an issue with the degree of coverage and their highest posterior density. The issue was that the star mix software produces a likelihood ratio. Along with that number is a statement that that number is regarded as an estimate. It takes into account it's based on various assumptions about uncertainties, and along with the number that's reported is a statement at that time to the effect that the true number, whatever it is most likely 99% likely to be higher than the reported number. So that the reported number is conservative in that sense. Subsequently, the 99% has been found not to be accurate. It could be It's not clear what it could be, but I've seen 76% mentioned, but it's not clear. This is on the face of it, it's a concern. We want our reports to be accurate. The New York State labs have undertaken a series of actions in response to that, including including removing that statement. However, the issue remains, and one possible action is for us to simply forward Commissioner Loftus' letter to the StarMix developers and ask them for a response before we actually do anything else. But before we entertain that thought, I'd like to hear some other discussion.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. There are a lot of things in there that I don't think that we could answer without their input anyway. There are some things that are specific to how this change is kind of implemented in New York that I also don't think that we can answer, but we can talk with the labs about it. But I think that's a reasonable start. There's mentioned in Mr. Loftus' letter about a draft paper, a draft article by StarMix developers describing the issue, and they suggest that we reach out for a copy of that. I don't know if that would address a lot of this, or if we could start with sending them these questions and then also ask for a copy of that.
No, I might go ahead, Ken.
Hi, this is Craig O'Connor from OTME. We actually have a member of the StarMix development team on the line, Richard Weisel. So he is here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Let's just hold off on that for a moment. Thank you, though. I think I was just not exactly sure my memory, but I thought when Dr. Buckleton joined us in August, there was discussion that they were preparing a scientific paper, and that's been 3 months ago. So it might not be unreasonable to ask for an update on that and a draft of the manuscript if possible. So I like the idea of doing both. Any other discussion or maybe thoughts about questions for the StarMix person who can join us in a minute?
I agree with Catherine. I think we really need to have the StarMix developers take a look at this letter.
Yes.
And try to address these concerns.
Yeah, that does seem appropriate. Thank you. Any other thoughts? All right, so let's bring in, is it Dr. Weigel going to join us?
He has been unmuted, so he should be able to speak.
Thank you.
I'm here, everybody.
Okay, good. Hello, I'm not sure what time, I'm not sure where you are. So where are you at the moment?
New Zealand.
Okay, so it's a little early for you, but thanks very much for staying awake or getting up early for us. So I don't know if you heard our discussion, but we have received a letter from the New York State Commission on Forensic Sciences asking for some clarifications on the issue involving coverage of the HPD. So I imagine that we will be asking ESR to provide us a response not only to that letter, but whatever information they can share with us. So is there something you can tell us at the moment that might shed some light on this issue?
You mentioned the paper that John and Duncan and others were writing. That's been completed, but it hasn't been published. I think when I spoke to John, he said nobody was interested in publishing it because of the sense, it wasn't of interest to people and it wasn't a novel development. But what we have done is published that internally, so it's sort of available. So I can certainly send you a copy of the finished document. That's like an internal publication. There's no problem in me doing that. Whoever the most appropriate person to send that to for your bit to circulate, and I think that will answer quite a lot of the questions that David mentioned in that last meeting.
Thank you. Why don't you wait until you get a request from us before? But I appreciate that. I'm a little curious. It's quite common these days to put something like this, an unpublished document, in a public repository, something like BioArchive or some other venue. If it's on the face of it, it seems like an important document, and that importance might not be appreciated by a scientific journal. but there certainly are mechanisms for making it publicly available, even on the ESR's own website, for that matter. But that's just a comment. Any questions from our committee members at the moment?
Jill, is there a timeline for getting back to the commission on this?
By their next meeting. Mm-hmm.
So they've requested to be informed, but we can update them, or you guys can make a motion to update them that you've made this outreach and you're awaiting the answers, and then you will respond accordingly.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
And I think it would be important that they answer every question specifically versus just referencing the paper. I mean, I think the paper will be important, but I think that answering this specific question, I think, will be helpful for everyone.
I agree.
Do we think that, so for the questions that are kind of directed at the laboratories, should we be sending these questions to the laboratories to address? I mean, I assume they all have slightly different implementation.
I would agree with that, Catherine, as well.
I do too.
Yes, I think that's I think that's a good idea. I think the labs have already taken some actions, but I think that's a good idea. Yes.
Yeah, I think it'd be great if we could actually get what actions the labs have taken, because we've had the same issue here and we've addressed this with our science advisory board. And as you said at the beginning, Catherine, the labs utilize this slightly differently amongst them. So it'd be important to see what the effect is. There also was a sort of an action that each lab could take to vet all of their records and previous reports. So I'd be interested to see what action the labs took to kind of retrospectively look to see what the extent of the problem was.
And they did make that report to the commission, but we could receive it also. I think that's what you're saying. Yes, thank you, Dr. Weeble. So I think if you really appreciate you joining us today, particularly with the time difference, but I think ESR should be prepared to, I imagine, to receive a letter from us asking for some help. So thanks again for joining.
Yeah, that's good, and I think John and I, when we were talking about it, saying it's like getting this information to the commission is probably going to be important. So whether it's by letter or he was saying either meet with the commission or be in one of their meetings is fine. So I think getting a letter from you is a good way forward.
Thanks very much. Thank you. All right, so let's just review where we are. So we got the BioTwig letter and discussed it at our August meeting. We discussed the issue with the New York State lab reps and the StarMix developer. The Commission on Forensic Science reviewed the same letter from BioTwig. In September, they raised some concerns and asked us to explain our opinion on the matter. We've also received a letter from Commissioner Loftus and heard from Dr. Wyville. So I think to respond to the questions posed by the Commission, Commissioner Green and Commissioner Loftus, it may be best that we provide a copy of their letters to ESR and request a written response prior to our next meeting in February, along with whatever other documentation they can provide, certainly including a draft manuscript of response. But clearly the detailed specific responses to the Commission's letters will be crucial. So I'm entertaining a motion for the committee to send such a detailed letter to ESR and I think at the same time inform the Commission of what we're doing, that we're requesting ESR to respond. And then I think let's do that, and then we'll come back to the labs. So to have a motion along those lines, please.
Ken, so move.
Thank you, Ken. And a seconder.
I second it.
Who's that?
Allison.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I'll call upon Bill Greg on that. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver.
Fred Beaver, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Gittings.
Catherine Gittings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Aye.
Thank you. And Dr. Souza.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes. So let's think now about the state labs. we have, there were four, I can't find it just at the moment, there were four actions that the state labs considered taking and reported to the commission that they took them. I think it would be helpful for us to have the labs responding to us along with any updates since they met with the commission. What are your thoughts? Could we do that verbally with the labs being present at our next meeting, or do you want a formal written response before then? Any thoughts on that?
I think the issues for me are fairly complex to understand, so a written response would be nice to have in advance.
Sure.
To compare it to this letter.
Sure, okay. Let me try and short circuit things, Catherine. So I'm going to entertain a motion from Dr. Gettings that the four state labs, and they'll need to be identified, that use star mix respond in writing to the committee before our next meeting about what actions they have done and what have been the consequences in response to the star mix issue over highest posterior densities. Did I get that close?
Yes, so moved, Catherine Gettings.
And a second of that.
I second it. Allison Eastman.
Thank you, Alison. And so I'll call upon your vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver.
Fred Beaver, aye.
Thank you, Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you, Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
And Dr. Kidd, thank you.
Ken Kidd, aye.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Jennifer Smith, aye.
Thank you, Dr. Souza.
Amanda Souza, aye.
Thank you. So, interesting developments there. So we're moving along. Investigative genetic genealogy. We have talked about the issue in general.
Mr. Chairman, it's Fred Bieber. Could I ask us to go back to 6B, familial search update? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sure, thank you.
Dr. Bieber had a question regarding familial
Okay.
search.
Sorry, Fred. You go ahead.
No, I had my hand raised, but
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
Working. So sorry. Jill, I have a question for you about your familial search summary. Is it correct that there has been one so-called positive identification with an arrest based on the New York State Familial Search Program so far? And if so, can you tell us anything about that case?
So yes, that is true. There has been a case that has been aided by the familial search process, and an arrest has been made. It's been publicly released, and so with that, I feel like I would encourage folks to kind of Google it rather than get into the specifics of the case because it has not gone to trial yet. I'm just not comfortable in speaking about specifics.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So when we met in August, we asked for an update regarding investigative genetic genealogy, and we have Dr. Ray Wickenheiser from New York State Police has a presentation. So Ray, thanks for joining us, and just sort of a warning up front. The clock is ticking.
Okay.
So we want to hear from you, but we don't want to hear from you for too long. So let's aim for 15 minutes to see how it goes.
Okay.
This is it's a very important topic, and we certainly appreciate your work. So anyway, go ahead.
Thank you. Very clear. So I'll try to make it brief. And certainly, if there's any questions, just let me know. So, investigative genetic genealogy. Next slide. So I have a brief disclaimer. Essentially, the opinions are mine and not of any organization I'm affiliated with. Next slide. Brief outline. So I'll talk about investigative genetic genealogy. I'll just be calling it IGG, a lot of other names, but that's the one I'm going to refer to. I'll talk about how it's conducted. I'll talk about a recidivism case study very briefly, just the applicability, what the current status is, and what I believe are the considerations for IGG implementation. Next slide. So that's just the subtitle page. On to the next one. So this is a very brief overview of the entire process. So I've broken it roughly into 3 phases. So the first phase is what we all know and love in terms of actual crime scene analysis. That is, we go to the crime scene, samples are taken, those come into the crime lab, we generate a profile, and in these kind of cases, we don't get a CODIS hit. Otherwise, if you had a CODIS hit, IgG is moot, you already have a suspect. So these are cases where you've done everything you can, you have DNA at the crime scene, and essentially no leads have been generated, the case remains unsolved. So everything the same in phase 1, other than we have an unsolved case. We have phase 2, which is IgG, which I'll be going into much greater depth into. But then phase 3, same again. Once you have a suspect, then you go get a known sample for comparison. You use traditional STRs, which we all do in our crime labs, and then the going to court, charges, not charges, all of those things, all the same. So really, what we're talking about is focusing on phase 2, and I'll spend a little bit more detail going into that now. So if I can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. So here's an overview of the process. I've broken it down to 6 steps. So the first one is analyzing for SNPs. So SNPs being single nucleotide polymorphisms. You have to have adequate DNA, adequate quality of DNA, in addition to what you developed from the STRs. So kind of an evaluation of cases to make sure that they're applicable. Next, once they are and you've developed that SNP profile, you'll do a database search with direct-to-consumer genealogy databases. This is where it departs from our familial searching. Sorry, say SNPs is also different from familial searching. I'll highlight that later. Once you've developed some related individuals, or some, they'll call them matches, but really not a match in a traditional forensic sense, as in people who could be related. You'll then do an ascendancy search, which is looking for a most recent common ancestor, one that would be shared between the person from the crime scene whose DNA you're searching for and these new potential relatives. After that, you'll do step 4, which is descendancy. Now you'll be building that family tree back down again and looking for the descendants, which will hopefully include that suspect. Then you'll look at the various families, looking for a triangulation of the family trees, trying to now home in from all of those potential descendants to ones who now may be the perpetrator. And now you'll look finally for specific suspects using all the attributes from the crime scene, probably most importantly location, but also sex, age, and other attributes that would be unique to that individual and other family members. Next slide, please. Okay, so just looking a little more carefully at some of those steps. The first one, developing a SNP profile. Currently, there's no governmental crime laboratories that do this step. So what we're talking about is now outsourcing it to a vendor. There's a number of vendor labs that do it. This slide is already updated, or outdated, I should say. The target DNA can be now as low as 1 nanogram, but very dependent on quality. They're seeking to have at least a 70% call rate, so you're looking at fairly good quality samples. Certainly more DNA is needed if there's less quality. So just giving a kind of an overview here in terms of the actual sample type. So very roughly 20 nanograms from bone, because it tends to be more degraded and of less quality. 10 nanograms of DNA from blood, again, very general, and instead of 2, now down to 1, or perhaps even less, but that's sort of what they're looking for in terms of these third-party labs. So that SNP analysis is outsourced to vendor wet labs, because even there, the current labs that are doing the genealogical research have a separate wet lab, so you have really 2 additional labs besides the crime lab that are involved. So now we also have whole genome sequencing that can be done as well, where the SNP's panel can be deduced out of those. So you've got a couple of different ways you can go, but ultimately it's SNPs that are going to be compared in these direct-to-consumer databases. So next slide. So the next step after developing, once you have that SNP profile, you'll take that profile and it will be placed into a direct-to-consumer genealogy database. So this is where people who go to companies like Ancestry.com and others are looking for relatives. There's approximately 30 million of these people distributed among 5 major vendors. But the 2 vendors that permit law enforcement searching are Family Tree and GEDmatch, which represent a small percentage of that. So currently, Family Tree has about 1.4 million profiles. They require a specific application from law enforcement. and they charge a fee. GEDmatch at this point is free, has approximately 300,000 profiles that have been purchased by a private company, and requires people to actually opt in. So once the crime scene profile is entered, then those matches to potential family members are returned with their email contact information and sent to Morgan Values. So now the next step of genealogy can take place. Next slide. So the next slide, and I apologize for the small size of this, just for illustration, or one of the tools that those folks doing the genealogical research would do is take those returns with the sent to Morgan Values and try to determine the amount of relatedness. So depending on the shared centimorgans between the crime scene sample and these potential relatives, you'll get an idea of the likely chances of different relationships, and that will help in the following phases of family tree building. Next slide. So once you have those relatives, now that you actually have known individuals, the next stage will begin, which will be building the family tree up, which is ascendancy. So you're taking those individuals and you'll move to create a common ancestor between those individuals which are now known and the crime scene individual profile. So you'll, depending on how closely related, so if they're first cousins, you go to grandparents, second cousins, you go to great-grandparents, third cousins, great-great-grandparents, and so forth. So you're going to build that tree upwards in order to include those individuals that you'll have a common ancestor between whoever the crime scene sample originated from and these people that now you know who they are. Next slide. Once you have those common ancestors, then you'll build the trees back down again. So depending, again, how closely related and how lucky you get in terms of that direct to consumer database match, you may have a very large family tree, including a number of say great-great-grandparents, or if you're much closer, maybe only grandparents or great-grandparents. So you'll have a family tree of varying size, which will now hopefully include that suspect. Next slide. So now we get to the actual lead generation component. So as I mentioned, these family trees are built. Some notable attributes I'd like to kind of focus on here. The first one is that all of this is done using publicly available genealogical information. So this is exactly the same procedure that anyone, potentially say somebody who's as an adoptee looking for a parent, would be looking for the same thing. So when you're building these trees, now getting it to actually locate the suspect family, you're going to look at a triangulation, particularly with proximity to crime. By triangulation, you're looking at, you might hopefully get somebody from both sides of that individual's family tree, the maternal and the paternal, and the only thing that brings them together is this happenstance of mother and father came together and created a child, and hence you'll see a crossing in the family tree. And when that family tree crosses, particularly in a location that's close to the crime, that's something that really would be strong evidence that you're in the right zone. And now you look closely at that family for children that now would match the attributes of that actual crime. So sex, age, and so forth, and now actually develop leads, which in turn, compared to the context of crime, would create suspects that now you move to that final phase 3, which is gaining the actual samples from that individual to then compare the STR profiles back to the crime scene. So that's really the wholeness of phase 2, which then gets us back to phase 3, which is now what we know again at the crime lab, where suspect profiles would be generated from a known sample to a suspect, and then the same machinery would kick in terms of charge, no charge, elimination, comparison, inclusion, and then eventually a court. Next slide, please. So very briefly, just some illustration, and I kind of move through this quickly. There can be some confusion from time to time, the difference between IgG and familial searching. Certainly the profiles are different. We're looking at SNPs versus STRs, and this is something that's done outside the crime lab because we do not have the technology. We use the data bank existing ENDIS for familial searching versus these private databases, and certainly different numbers of people that are in there, but people who are in there out of their free will versus people who are convicted or arrested of crime. But certainly the net is thrown much larger, And in these unsolved cases, we're really trying sort of novel approaches, but certainly by terms of novel, it's not new in terms of folks have been doing this in the genealogy community for some time, and hence we're just borrowing exactly that same process in order to apply it to these unsolved crimes. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk about really briefly, why are we doing this? With recidivism, potentially same individuals who are committing serious crimes over and over on new victims. So it's really is an opportunity to solve crime, and that's part of what the Crime Lab really, that's our mission, what we're here to do. And so if you look at one particular case, probably one of the big, certainly the first big case for IGD, the most notable. Next slide is the Golden State serial killer. So Joseph DeAngelo. So if you could just move to the next slide, please. You're looking at his case. I mean, he's really driven a lot of the interest in this and pled guilty very recently, 13 homicide, over 50 sexual assaults. That case remained unsolved for decades. Unbelievable amount of resources went into it. Was solved in 63 days with investigative genetic genealogy. So you have a tool here that, when used appropriately, can solve major crimes, and then, given that these individuals are still out in the community, potentially solve crimes as well. So a lot of potential, hence why the interest. Next slide, please. And just moving down from that particular slide. So there's a number of policies and draft policies that are out there, probably most notably Department of Justice is an interim policy. So certainly there's guidance that is developing in the area. Next slide, as well as a number of position statements, including and direction to the community. Major forensic organizations have come out with recommendations, including ASCLD, the Consortium of Forensic Science Organizations, Tom Callahan, Chief Scientist of the FBI, as well as SWIGNAM. So certainly that would be positive to be able to follow the guidance that is currently developing. Next slide. So in terms of a path forward, again, just my opinion here, we have, I feel, a good framework in New York for familial searching, which is very applicable. These cases, when you search them and don't have a hit with CODIS, what it means is you applied all of the accreditation guidelines, everything we have in place with the FBI QAS. So the quality is done before you get to that point. So that's a good thing to have in place. Certainly you want to respect the privacy of these databases and abide by the terms of service. You really want to restrict it to major crimes. I should also include unidentified human remains in here, particularly victims of crime or murder victims. You want to make sure the crime scene sample is believed to be from the potential perpetrator, has the right quality and quantity in order to do it, and have appropriate signed MOUs in place to make sure everyone is going to follow through with the requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to continue in the requirements, once the lead is generated, a known sample is taken, and again, just a number of requirements in terms of making sure that references are expunged, so a lot of privacy things. And these are really just some of the other considerations that are thrown. Probably the biggest single thing is the last point, and that is sometimes when you have a large family tree, there may be target samples where taking a sample from one of those other relatives would really help in terms of the investigation. So that needs to be very carefully done, and making sure the individual is informed. So it's just something that's probably one of the biggest sticking points, is things to consider at this level. So just in summary, which is the last slide, proportionality, which is just essentially the risk benefit. Is there a benefit versus the risk? Certainly there are risks that we will have to make sure it's done appropriately, but given the magnitude of these cases, and you can't solve them any other way, the public safety issues, I believe there is a balance to doing it if done correctly. So it certainly supports the mission of a crime lab, which is the maximization of the value of evidence. We want to make sure that it's done right to continue with the public trust. I believe that New York has an excellent framework to do it properly by using our familial searching criteria. And I feel it's also a package of services where, when you don't get hit, you don't give up on a case, you still try to solve it, because not only is the public safety closure for families, but it's really what we do in terms of providing scientific leads to our investigators. So certainly we should continue to improve on the best practices. And in my opinion, it is the greatest development of forensic DNA since DNA was applied to forensics. So I'm very much a proponent. So that's a summary, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Ed Bieber here. Mr. Chairman, Dr. Weir, is this the appropriate time for me to offer some comments?
Dr. Weir, you're muted. If you could just unmute.
Sorry, Fred, I was just asking my own, but you go ahead. I mean, I was just thanking Ray for a very nice talk, but Fred, please go ahead.
I have two general comments that relate to Ray's excellent presentation. One is a concern I have as a medical geneticist that we don't really need to type 600 to 800,000 SNPs to do this kind of analysis. Probably 40,000 would work, and Ken may have comments on that. And we have to remember that one of the ways that STR analysis was accepted generally across the board and was able to resist challenges by defense with regard to medical privacy is that the loci that are used in SNP analysis do not interrogate any disease-related loci in the human genome, nor does the STR profile predict the diathesis or risk for adult onset diseases or inherited disorders. Once we, the editorial, we start doing whole genome sequencing to develop leads in investigative genetic genealogy, or if we're doing WGS, whole genome sequencing, or typing 600,000 to 800,000 SNPs, you will, by definition, be interrogating loci that relate to diseases. And I think that the medical ethics community that I'm in touch with has some generalized, well, they certainly have an awareness of this. And from my discussions with Beragen, which has, as Ray mentioned, purchased GEDmatch, they claim through my conversations with Danny Hall at Beragen to be working on a kit that would type on the order of 40 to 60,000 SNPs rather than 800,000. So that's one thing I think New York State has to be aware of if we proceed to put holy water over the use in the state of New York. The second thing is something very important that Ray mentioned on one of his last slides, and that is the FBI's recommendations that Mr. Ted Hunt presented back in 2019 does specifically mention the covert collection without informed consent, the covert collection of discarded DNA from individuals who one knows are unrelated to the crime itself, but could rule in or rule out a whole swath of a large multi-generational family tree. Yet they then recommend getting consent to analyze the sample. And in my mind, this is the reverse order in which it should be done. And I think Ray mentioned this, and I'd just like to echo that concern raised by many legal theorists, which could present bona fide legal challenges to this process. So I think as our subcommittee examines this matter, and of course, I think it's not a surprise that I support genealogics or investigative genetic genealogy. I do think we have to be, at first principles, aware that we don't need 800,000 SNPs to do this. And again, I'd like to emphasize my concern about covert collection from distant relatives. So I'll end my comments here. Thank you.
Ray, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Bieber's comment. Certainly, right now, when you consider the techniques for SNPs and these databases have been developed not for forensics whatsoever. So these are kits that came from spitting in a tube where it's a single source DNA and there's lots of it. So it's really existing technology that has been adapted to forensic needs. So I thoroughly believe that there will be, as Dr. Bieber indicated, development of much more targeted SNPs that will really focus on the ones that are forensically significant and stay away from those that are not of much value to forensics, but create these issues in terms of privacy and whatnot. So I welcome that movement. And certainly this will continue to be refined as a better tool for forensics, because at this point, it really is a direct-to-consumer tool that has been really co-opted for forensic use. So it will improve, I feel, markedly within the next couple of years.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd, did you have some comments?
Yes, a couple of comments. One, I agree with what Fred said, that there are ethical concerns with using 1 million, 2 million SNPs, because a lot of them will, in fact, give specific information not on diseases, but the risk of diseases more likely. And I think, well, let me just leave it at that.
Thank you. Other committee members' comments, and then we'll think about what our next steps are, if any.
Yeah, this is Jennifer, and I just want to thanks, Ray. Great presentation. And I think all of you guys know where I stand on this, and I just don't know the committee's role in this. But to be honest, the reason why there aren't better forensic kits there's no money put behind next-gen sequencing and trying to focus on this. Dr. Kidd has given us information over the years, as have many of you, about targeting and looking at SNPs. And if this committee could play a role in actually trying to move this forward so we can do all of these things, because there has to be funding put forward. The labs have to feel like it's time to look at next-gen sequencing, looking at SNPs. And until we have some courageous labs that go forward with this and try to bring it in-house, it's never going to happen. And so I'm excited to hear Ray talking about it, trying to familiarize it. But I'd love to see New York, take the first steps so that we can move to these, because just like with PCR, at the very beginning, the forensic community embraced PCR. And it's, the only thing I would argue with you, Ray, is the best thing since sliced bread, because I would say actually when we started using PCR, we started exonerating people. And I think that if this committee has any effect whatsoever on the funding that's going to be needed to do this, if we have any influence at all, that's going to have to happen, or these labs just will never be able to take that big step. And we won't get the kits that are forensically relevant in order to do this. So I applaud you, Ray, for your efforts, and all the members of this committee who've been working on SNPs for years. So I'm in with you. But we have to pragmatically look at how this is really going to roll out. And if the subcommittee can help with that, I think we need to try.
One of the issues that Jenny just brought up was related to Ray's excellent point that all of this has to be outsourced right now. None of the forensic labs can deal with SNPs. And the US is way behind Europe. Several of the labs in Europe are using SNPs routinely in casework. And I've always felt frustrated as a pro-SNP person that the US was not moving to use SNPs when they can be very powerful in ways that the STRs are not.
Go ahead, Jennifer. Any other comments? I certainly agree. As a SNP analyst, I recognize the power and largely untapped in the forensic community in the US.
Can I just ask, I'm looking at the, on page 292 of the documents we received, we have the content of a letter from Dr. Walsh from Department of Health about the status of the genetic genealogy efforts in New York. So it says that Parabon has been approved for this, and Bodie has also been approved. And then it looks like we're waiting for the wet labs to be approved. And it says specifically to perform a large Snip panel. So the wet laboratories have to be approved by New York State Department of Health to perform a large Snip panel. The wording of her message sounds like that would preclude at least the whole genome sequencing if it is being limited to a large SNP panel. So I guess, yes, some of these concerns, I'm wondering how we can address those as we review these applications or things that are being granted to the laboratories. Will we have the opportunity to weigh in on how the testing is done? Yes.
Dr. Gettings, if I could just step in for a moment as well on this. As a follow-up to the memo that you're speaking of from Dr. Walsh, we also have another additional update on this that she wanted me to convey. She was unable to attend the meeting today. And on October 30th, Akesogen received New York State Department of Health Clinical Laboratory Evaluation Program approval in the category of genetic testing molecular for an analysis of DNA extracts from New York State forensic cases using an 850,000 single nucleotide polymorphism or SNP test. They can now use this assay to generate data from extracts generated from New York State cases. And DNA extract must occur in a forensic laboratory approved to perform DNA extraction from New York State case evidence. Akesogen is the wet lab partner of Parabon Technologies, approved in July by the CLEP in the category of forensic identity limited to investigative genetic genealogy and phenotyping interpretation. So that's the update that we have from the New York State Department of Health from Dr. Walsh. So a wet lab has been approved.
Okay, great. So is there a point at which we see any of this or, weigh in on how it's done or no?
So in terms of the DNA subcommittee and the role that is the purview that they have, it would be only if the public forensic laboratories were to take on the SNP testing or any additional portions of IgG.
I see. Okay.
I'd like just to ask Fred a follow-up question on the 40 or 60,000 SNPs. Has there been a proof of principle that 60,000 profile has been submitted to GEDmatch?
Say that again, Bruce.
I mean, so currently does GEDmatch accept the 60,000 SNP profile?
I'm not sure their kit is yet commercially available, but my rhetorical question then becomes, do we really want to put holy water over New York State having samples typed for 800,000 SNPs, given what we know about the ability, therefore, to interrogate medical or the diathesis or predilection to genetic disease? I'm a little concerned about this.
Yeah, I understand that. I think it's a good point. I was just curious to know if in fact, in practice, the lower number will work with the current databases. I take your point, but I don't know. It's not clear to me what we can do other than thinking about it, airing it, doing in our own research and writing, certainly addressing the issues. This is not a group with the budget to even hold a conference to air the issues. Certainly we can. I think today was a great first step, having Ray come along and give a very nice talk. We could continue with that kind of work. I would like to hear from. A detailed analysis of using a much smaller panel, for example, and what the implications are, what the access to these large databases. It's not good having a panel if there's no database that will accept it to do a search. So.
Can I break in here and ask Jill if I understood correctly that the state has approved a lab to do this testing, but our committee has had no input into that approval?
Dr. Kidd, you would be correct. It falls under the purview of Department of Health and their public law at this time.
that's something that I think is a problem.
And I have some data from one of my graduate students that I think perhaps Professors Kidd and Weir have seen before. She now works at the Broad Institute in Cambridge, Mass. Her name is Wendy Brodeur, and she did her graduate thesis at Harvard with me as her supervisor. And she analyzed a number of different SNP panels looking for first-degree relatives, not extended relations, but in one of her panels of unlinked SNPs, I think 91 SNPs did the job at identifying people who have a coefficient of relationship of 1/2, parents, sibs, children. I can share those data with the committee from Wendy, and it wouldn't be hard, I don't think, for Bruce or Ken or me to do a more extended analysis of a selected panel of SNPs on the order of 40, 60,000, and to do the experiments. And I think it would be my position at this point that our committee would look, our subcommittee would do well to consider this matter as maybe one of the first states that goes into this uncharted territory, because I think the medical privacy issues are potentially paramount here.
Yes, so I'm just going to sound a little note of caution. It's the tremendous success of the genetic genealogy is rests on the long regions of identity by descent, which you do not obtain with 40 or 60,000 SNPs. So I'm hopeful, but I'm somewhat not quite as optimistic as I think you might be, Fred, on identifying relatives beyond very close degrees. Certainly nothing like the third and fourth cousins that we're seeing from the chips. But your point's well taken. I think anything we can do. I mean, personally, I'm interested and be happy to work with both you and Ken. It's not clear to me that it's a committee activity, other than continue to receive information, and certainly maybe we could ask you, Fred, to give us a short presentation at our next meeting to make the case that a small number of unlinked SNPs will identify close degrees of relationship. And because I must say it's a stretch.
Well, I just want us to have this on our radar screen.
Sure. No, I think that's good. Yeah.
The world is watching us carefully as one of the first states that moves forward with this and vis-a-vis the approval, and taking this to the ridiculous extreme, we do collect heel stick cards on every newborn baby in America for mandatory genetic testing. So there's nothing to prevent society from genotyping every live-born baby in America. And I'm not suggesting that, but I think there's a measured middle ground that we who are involved in genetics and medical genetics need to pay close attention to, and not ignore the reality that I don't think we need to do whole genome sequencing to accomplish the goals of genetic genealogy.
Thank you. Thank you. So,
let me just, Bruce, correct you. At
Please.
40 to 60,000 SNPs, they are not all unlinked.
Okay, I thought that's what Fred said. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I think in Wendy's thesis, she experimented with different SNP panels that she created with data from the Broad. And
Yeah.
I can share her data with you all.
Sorry, I thought you said they were unlinked. Okay. Okay, so Ken, Dr. Kidd's other point about do we have a voice in this situation? It's not clear. I mean, I guess legally at this point we don't. until the state labs start doing this kind of activity or attempting to. So I think unless I've got an alternative suggestion, that we invite Dr. Bieber to amplify on his comments at our next meeting. Do I have any? Yeah, thank you. And Ray, if you're still there, thank you very much. That was very helpful. Really
welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ray. Dr. Weir, if I could just intervene for one moment. I do know Dr. Smith has to jump off. She had a hard stop.
Sure.
So we will say goodbye to her.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe. Wear your mask.
Bye-bye.
I am looking at the, we've already just a couple of minutes past. We do have a fairly important item requiring a vote, and this concerns the New York State Police Lab on familial search expansion validation. We have a fairly lengthy document in our package. Looks like it's 62 pages. I have some concerns, and I'm not willing to be overruled. I'm not ready to proceed. And I'll tell you why in a minute, but just let me ask Dr. Dooley, is there some urgency on this?
They do have a presentation to present, so perhaps we would like to view that. I know.
Sure, that'd be fine. And I think everybody's agreed that we can go a bit over time. So that'd be nice. So who do we have from the lab?
We do have Dan Myers, who is the recorded voice on the presentation. We are hopeful that technology will cooperate and we will be able to play this video seamlessly. If not, though, he is on standby and he will be available after for questions.
Okay, thank you. Roll it. Mm-hmm. Do we have sound?
Jelly, we don't have sound.
Okay. Let's see.
If Dan is there, can he join and narrate these slides?
Hold on.
Charlie, we can't hear that sound at all.
Okay. This works. This did work when we were practicing this, so I'm not sure why we're not getting sound right now.
Was it that we had to have everybody else mute?
That is helpful if everyone else could mute. I can go back to the beginning.
There you go. I just heard it.
Okay, ready? We'll try again.
Before getting into the results of the validation, I would like to give a little bit of a background about what familial searching is in the laboratory.
Are we hearing it?
In the lab, we try to do any part of the investigation. We don't get into any of the metadata. We don't look at pedigrees. We don't dig into
No, it sounds like it's in a tin can.
The only thing we deal with in the laboratory are numbers. We deal with the DNA profiles. We deal with the statistics, and what we release is the offender barcode. We don't release the offender name. The offender barcode is
Not understandable.
Shelley, I can't hear it.
Okay.
Can we just have Dan? Can we have Dan join us?
Hello, I'm here. I'm Ray's computer.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Dan, can you speak off the cuff?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
So Do you want me to begin the slideshow, Dan, so you can narrate through it, or?
If that would, if you could do that, that'd be great.
Okay. All right, hold on one sec. Okay. Do you hear sound?
No sound, Shelley.
Okay, so the problem is now when I play the presentation on my computer, all I'm hearing is Dan speaking, and you can't hear that.
Sure. Maybe let's just have Dan talk to us, and maybe he's got his slides on his own machine. He could at least read them to us. That'll be fine. I think we've got a general understanding of the technology, but it'd be nice to hear from him.
Shelley, you could just pull up the slideshow but not actually play it, right? Pull up the PowerPoint.
That's what I was just trying to do.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me try one more time. This worked yesterday when we practiced.
Okay.
I apologize.
No.
I mean, can you see the slides now? I just will go through this mode.
Yeah. This is good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first, I'd like to give a description of what familial searching is, because I know there's a lot of people that are watching this that don't understand what it means in the lab, but I know the subcommittee and most other labs know what it is. So in the lab, it's a multi-step process of DNA comparisons and statistical analyses to use to screen the offender database for potential biological relatives. And now what the purpose is to generate a lead or multiple leads in a criminal investigation. In the lab, what we're not doing is we're not identifying the perpetrator, we're not defining specific relationships, and we're not providing the likelihood ratios, the statistical weights, and the mass probabilities like in a criminal case. And we'll see why in just a second. Next slide. So how does this work? The big part to understand with this is that it isn't the context of a criminal case. What we're talking about is a large database search. We're talking about comparing it to a very large number of samples, the question sample, the unknown. And most investigators, most judges, most attorneys, what they see is they see this single comparison, one sample to a limited number of contributors. This is a very narrow context. In the lab, we refer to this as a high prior, or the non-DNA evidence, medical records, birth records, picture ID, are usually something that leads investigators to this small subset of potential relatives. Whereas with the large kinship database searches in New York, we're talking about more than 700,000 samples. So basically, we're canvassing the entire database, and the more likelihood ratios that we calculate, the more likely it is that we find high likelihood ratios with people that aren't relatives. So this is why we do a secondary test. Next slide. So here, this is an example search from our initial familial searching validation. This is a lab staff target. One of our lab staff donated their swab and their relative's swab, and we did a ProCo search in the initial validation. And you can see in this list, this is a list of likelihood ratios and offenders that the lab staff's target was searched against. Likelihood ratios were calculated and ranked. So you can see number 330, the one that I've highlighted there, is the lab staff's relative with a likelihood ratio of 3,500. Now, you can't see the top of the list, but the very first return, the highest likelihood ratio was almost 1.2 million. This was an offender that was not related at all to the lab staff target. So we can see why in these cases, without that secondary test, we can't just depend on a likelihood ratio, and we can't be disclosing the likelihood ratios because we don't want to lead investigators down a path without that secondary test, at least with the ProCo data.
This is Mandy Sozer. Can you tell me what relative was this?
This was a child.
A parent child?
Yeah, with
okay.
With ProCo data.
Yep, okay.
So next slide. Now this one, is hard to tell because I had animations in it. But what this is an analogy that I gave at a CODIS users meeting a couple years back. And it just kind of demonstrates how a familial search is conducted and why we do the things that we do with a familial search. So there's this whole community of people that go to baseball games for the sole purpose of catching a fly ball. And what those people need to do is they need to decide where they're going to sit, where they're going to maximize their chances of catching a fly ball. So they need to buy their ticket and sit somewhere. And one strategy that can be taken is buy every ticket in the stadium. Well, nobody has enough money to do that. Nobody has enough resources to do that. So that is impossible. That's like the red line you see down there at the bottom. What another strategy that can be taken is not buy a ticket at all and go stand outside the park. This diagram is Wrigley Field. And so you'd be standing out on West Waveland Avenue or North Sheffield Avenue, waiting for a home run to be hit. This is like having a very high likelihood ratio, a ceiling, we would say, and waiting for it. Now, this is a rare event to have such high likelihood ratios or have a home run hit at a stadium that you might not catch a fly ball at all at any game. So the strategy that we took initially was to set the likelihood ratio lower. And in this analogy, what people do is they buy tickets along the baseline. And you can see I've put pink dots there to show where fly balls will be hit. So what we want to do, because we can definitely sit in a seat where we're not catching a fly ball, this would be just like finding an offender that isn't a relative. We want to further refine that. Well, what this community of people do that want to catch fly balls is they focus on where the larger distribution or where the more concentrated distribution of fly balls go, and that's above the dugouts. That would be like our secondary test. That would be like our YSDR test. So this is what we did initially because we wanted to maximize the success of the program as quickly as possible. Now, part of the reason why we conducted this validation we're here today is what do we do when we have female returns? What do we do when we have half SIB returns that are through a female that have high likelihood ratios? Well, we can set the ceiling. We can institute a hybrid-like system where we can also look for those. So next slide. So first we need to define the problem. And the problem was, what are we going to do with all this data where we have the additional CODIS core loci? What are we going to do with the global filer and fusion data? What are we going to do with female returns? What are we going to do with multiple returns? And what are we going to do if we get a target in that has no secondary test? What do we do with a female target, or we get some evidence in that does not have a YSTR? Well, to handle the targets that don't have YSTRs, we would need additional software. But until then, what we could do is use pop stats after the calculations within the returns, within the YSTRs, and add an additional threshold for the additional data. Next slide. So how are we going to go about doing that? Well, the same way we did the initial validation, where we want to evaluate the effectiveness and reliability of using a likelihood ratio as an additional filter this time. Before, it was a primary filter. This time, we want to use it as an additional filter using the expanded loci to detect familial relationships. So how we would do that is analyze and characterize multiple likelihood ratio cutoffs, like in an epidemiological study. Basically, what's the sensitivity and specificity of detecting relatives above different likelihood ratio cutoffs? And then further evaluating that using our laboratory staff samples like you saw in my example. Next slide. This is just one study. I conducted 5 sensitivity and specificity studies. This was a global filer final phase study. This was a 2,000 simulated sample set. Along the bottom, you can see the likelihood ratios that were evaluated. And the bars, the green bars are the sensitivity and the black bars are the specificity. And what we're looking for here is a balance point for the sensitivity and specificity. Where was that inflection point? Where did they change? Where did we balance true and false positives? That's where we're going to find most of our relatives within our set and our secondary tests. We also, to evaluate a ceiling, we looked for 0 false positives. And what we found was that our corridor for our sensitivity and specificity balance point for global filer data was log LR2 to log LR3. And our zero false positive point, our 100% specificity point was log LR10 for the 2000 simulated sample set. Next slide. So this is all of the sensitivity and specificity studies that we've conducted so far for 150 to 200 simulated target sample sets, with the exception of one down on the bottom I'll mention in a second. Oh, I'm sorry, that is the 150 to 200 sample set. I apologize. So if you look across the top, these are the log likelihood ratios that we evaluated for our blue-green ProCo, IDF, Global Filer, and CODIS Core 20 data sets. As we go down the table, that's increasing the number of loci. As we go across the table, that's increasing the likelihood ratio cutoff that was evaluated. For the ProCo and the IDF, where you see pink, is the sensitivity and specificity data that is at the log likelihood ratios that we use for cutoffs now in familial searching. And in pink for the global filer and the CODIS Core 20 is what we're proposing as the likelihood ratio cutoff for global filer and CODIS Core 20 data. The yellow is where we see the balance point corridor that was found. If we look down the table under average candidate list size, what's important here as you go down the table, the list size tends to decrease. As you add more loci, we expect that list size to decrease. As you go across the table, as you increase the likelihood ratio, you see the list size also tends to decrease. So now down at the bottom, it's kind of hard to see because of the animations. The 100% specificity point for the global filer in pink is log LR8. This is a 200 sample set. If we remember from the previous slide with the bar graph, that was the 2000 simulated sample set. That was a log LR10. Here, with less samples in the set, we see that 100% specificity point is lower, and that's what we expect. As you calculate more likelihood ratios, you have a better chance of finding a high one. So now beneath that table, it's kind of hard to see, is actually what we found for our family sets. On the right-hand side, comparing the log likelihood, the sensitivity for the family set, or what our familial hit rate for the family set with the sensitivity that we found for the 100% specificity point, and it looks pretty close. And for the other studies, for the ProCo and IDF, that's from the previous study, and then the global filer, we see that the sensitivity is very close. And what this demonstrates is that we are looking at a good method to detect familial relationships using these thresholds and reduce the possibility of false positives. Next slide. This is the process, how it works now with ProCo and IDF targets. We have a ProCo 13 locus target that gets searched using the Denver familial searching software against the entirety of the database, against a little bit more than 700,000 offenders. This will generate a YSTR list, or a list of offenders that will be tested with YSTRs. And then those YSTRs will be compared to the target. And anything that is deemed an association under our protocol will then be released as an offender. And for IDF, we have two thresholds. We do a partition search, the IDF target using the ProCo threshold against the ProCo partition, and then the IDF target against the IDF and global filer partition using the IDF threshold, producing two lists. And then those two lists go on for YSTR testing. And those YSTRs are compared to the target, and anything that is deemed an association is released. Next slide. So this adds in how we will propose to use the global filer and CODIS Core 20 targets. ProCo targets and IDF targets won't change. That process will be exactly the same. But when we would get a global filer target, until we have some software that we might be able to use, what we can do is do the partition search against the ProCo and the IDF using the ProCo and the IDF cutoffs, producing these two lists. Within these lists, anything that we cannot get YSTRs from or are female returns, we can port into PopStats upon conversion to global filer or CODIS Core 20 data, use PopStats to calculate likelihood ratios, and if anything meets the ceiling, then we will propose to release it. anything that we can get YSTRs from will go on to YSTRs to shorten that list, and anything that's what would be deemed associations as if it were a pro-colon IDF target would then be converted to global filer and then ported to PopStats for more likelihood ratio calculations. And then if those meet the global filer threshold, they would be released. Now, what's important here is that this is being done after Denver calculations, after YSTRs, and using PopStats. There's no new software here. And if we end up with a list that or some offenders that in previous protocol would be a release, now does not meet the global filer threshold, they would not be released. Next slide. So here, the current cutoffs for the ProCo and the IDF is log likelihood ratio 3.7, and for IDF is log likelihood ratio 4.0. And what we're proposing is an additional filter as an additional cutoff and a ceiling using PopStats post Denver calculations and post YSTR comparisons. For those with YSTR associations, that threshold would be log likelihood ratio 3. And for candidates lacking YSTR, it would be the ceiling. We're proposing log likelihood ratio 8. Thank you for your time, and I'll be available shortly for questions.
So thank you, Dan. That was very helpful. So I looked at your document, and I couldn't find in the document or in the references details on how the likelihood ratios are calculated.
How we're going to calculate them when we institute familial searches, or how I calculated them for doing the sensitivity and specificity studies?
Well, either. They're the ones that you showed us, and it's only my concern. What I suspect is that you've done them exactly correctly, according to current practice. I'm very concerned about the widespread assumption of independence of the markers, particularly for relatives. I don't think we're getting as much bang for the buck by adding additional markers. I don't think the likelihood ratios increase as much as we hope they do. Now, this is not, it's unfair to suggest a criticism of your work, because I think I suspect you're doing things exactly as is common. But I think it's about time we started thinking about this issue. You've done some very nice experiments here, appropriately, on a very large database. And I think it's probably time we started doing other experiments to address the issue of independence of multiple markers. These are very simple to do, even in the case of unrelateds. I'm very worried that we're overstating the strength of the evidence.
Okay, we did address that very briefly. We mentioned the linkage of some loci, and the idea is that when they are linked, true relatives are going to tend to go up that list, and those that aren't will tend to go down that list. There will be some migration back and forth, and where it's going to make the biggest difference is going to be right there at that threshold, and in the end, or right at the threshold that we're determining, and in the end, we're just increasing the list size, and we're not presenting any weight of evidence here.
Okay, thank you. I understand. I certainly noticed you, and it was nice work on the link loci. I'm talking about the dependence of calculations matching probabilities for other calculations for unlinked loci. There's the consequences of basically the finite population size. These have become critical when we have large numbers of loci. It didn't matter when we had a dozen or so. Now we've got 20 or more. This is becoming quite important. I don't know quite what to do. I don't know if Dr. Beaver or Kidd have any comments on my observation.
Well, one could do the experiment you suggest, Dr. Weir, by just removing the data from n number of loci from global filer and rerun the analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm quite worried that we are continuing to add loci and multiplying the likelihood ratios together as though they were independent, and they're not.
Yeah, yeah.
Particularly for relatives.
They're also not completely independent when you consider population differences.
Of course, yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's a huge, I think it's a big topic, and I don't quite know what to do. I mean, so certainly I think the work we've just heard is fine. It's state of the art. I think the state of the art's defective. Is it going to cause harm by proceeding? Probably not. It's going to affect, I think, with the current technology, the experiments we've seen show appropriate rankings of the likelihood ratios. So in that sense, getting a ranked list and identifying suspects is fine. I don't think the numbers are accurate by any stretch, and I am concerned about the possible implications. I just don't know. So I'm going to, having raised this issue, I would like, I mean, it would be very nice, I think. New York State's in a very strong position to do some further experimentation with their database to address the issue of dependence among multiple loci, among unlinked multiple loci. So.
And I have one minor semantic question that I think could help alleviate potential confusion by others not on this subcommittee who read the report. Tom, you keep referring to releasing offenders. I don't think you really mean that. And is there another word you could use or phrase other than release offenders?
Well, the way it happens is in the lab we do the search and anything that is considered good for release, all we have access to here is a barcode, and that barcode is the offender barcode that is given to DCJS. And DCJS, the Department of Criminal Justice Services, is the one that actually does the release of the offender name that they've gotten from the barcode. Yes.
I understand what you mean, but you don't literally mean you're releasing offenders.
No.
You're turning over the identity of that offender for the next phase in the process.
What we do is release the identification of the candidate that would be correlated with the barcode that Dan provides to my office.
I just think that phrase could be clarified. Because in your conclusion on page 52, and it's our red page, I think 345, Roman numeral 9, in the first paragraph of the conclusion, it says gives you the potential to release offenders. And I know you don't mean that. So release the identification, or I think that needs to be reworded.
And kind of just to kind of a springboard off of what Fred said, I also wonder if the term false positive is really an accurate term. When you're saying you're getting false positives.
What we're doing is we're treating it like an epidemiological study. It's not that it is a false positive or a true positive. We're just treating the likelihood ratio as if it were a test to detect. Anything that isn't a relative that comes up in a list, say the Denver software list, we call a false positive, but then what happens is we do that secondary test. So it's just a term that we use to actually determine what that threshold is. And what we're trying to do is maximize the number of relatives that we get in a list and minimize the number of offenders that aren't related in a list.
It's an alpha error, right? Epidemiologically, is that?
Yeah.
An alpha error? Yeah, we measured using the standard formulas. I think in the back of the document there for sensitivity.
Yeah. Do I have any further discussion on the presentation and then on the Jill, what is the action we are asking the commission to do? What exactly? To accept the validation threshold.
Accept the validation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other comments on the report?
I'd appreciate a copy of the video presentation. I had a hard time seeing some of they were just small, and I'd like to see the and hear the entire presentation.
We did send that out to you. You should have received that.
I am so sorry.
Yep. Nope. It should be in your Dropbox.
Is there a way to send that out through Box? I can't actually get in Dropbox. No.
Unfortunately, the file was too large to share on Box. I did try to do that at first, but it kicked back. The only way that we were able to get it out was Dropbox, the size. I apologize for that.
I would like to see more details on the calculations, even if it's a publicly available document. The references were not adequate. I could not find how you did the calculations from the references. So I think it would be an easy thing to provide.
So and I also really appreciate what you're trying to do in that in this study. And I wondered if you are incorporating mutations, the chance of mutations.
In the sensitivity and specificity studies, no, we aren't, but they are included in the software, the Denver software that we currently use.
Okay.
All right, so I'm watching the time. I think we need to move along unless there's further discussion. So we are required to make a recommendation to the commission on accepting these validation thresholds. So do I have a motion from someone to issue a binding recommendation to the Commission on Forensic Science to accept the validation thresholds as proposed by the New York State Police? Someone willing to do that?
How can we do that, Mr. Chairman, if we don't know precisely how the calculations of LRs were made?
Well, that was my concern, because I don't know. But if I don't know.
Well, maybe I can help a little bit.
Yes.
For the sensitivity and specificity studies, we didn't have the software to do the calculations with the extra loci. So what I did was I wrote a VBA macro that did that, just like with PopStats or with the Denver software. And I did check it against PopStats to show that it was calculating the same numbers. If you would like to see the macro, I'm sure that I can ask our administration if we can provide it.
Well, I'd like to see the equations underlying the macro.
The questions what?
The equations. I'd like to see the instructions you use to
definitely
to write the code you used.
Definitely.
Sort of a general concern. This document that you provided, it's fine, but I don't think the references enabled someone like me to understand what you did.
Okay.
I know what you're saying, but I have no doubt that they were done correctly, but I would like to see that. So in that sense, I am uncomfortable proceeding, and that's why I was asking at the beginning, Jill, what the urgency is, if there is some.
Well, I would still put together the motion and see if there is anyone who's willing to make the motion, and then if not, then we would need an additional motion to have the state police provide the information that you're requesting.
Okay, so I should express my personal preference would be to delay action until we get more information. But if someone would like to proceed, we can put it to a vote. All right, then, I don't hear anything, so I would like to propose that we delay action on this item and pending further information from the New York State Police on how they did the calculations.
So moved, Fred Bieber.
Thank you, Fred. A seconder on that.
Second, Ken Kidd.
Ken Kidd, thank you. So I'm going to call on you to vote. My vote is aye for this. It's a vote to delay pending further information. So Dr. Beaver.
Fred Bieber, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman. Are you still with us?
Yes, I had to unmute. I'm sorry. Allison Eastman.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd.
Ken Kidd, aye.
Dr. Smith's left us, and Dr. Souza.
Amanda Souza, aye.
Thank you. So I think the motion passes. Is that correct? We have enough.
That's correct. The motion passes.
And Bruce, could I ask if we could independently contact the state police just to ask any other questions about the studies? If we do that independently, would that be okay?
I'm on Ray's computer. I'm gonna step out. Thank you for your time, and then I'll let him ask or answer those questions.
Thank you, Dan. I'm not sure the legalities, Jill or
Natasha, is that appropriate, or should we have them send them to our office and then we can distribute accordingly?
You can do that. I mean, long as no one's making any kind of decisions as a whole without, the public knowing, I don't see an issue with giving them documents to review independently, as long as there's no decisions being made.
Sure, and I'm happy to follow up. Just articulating my questions. Thank you. All right, we should move along, I think. CODIS audits, Dr. Dooley, any update on CODIS audit memo?
Just as statutorily required, provided the memo saying that there was a document audit of the DNA laboratories throughout New York State using our checklist, and all the DNA labs across the state, there were no findings. So given COVID times, this is how we proceeded was with documents.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a disclosure of an incorrect profile for the New York State Police Crime Lab. Informational purposes, Ray is still available. Do we have any questions for Ray or further information, Jill, on that? I think we met this. I think we've heard about this in the past. And is anybody wishing to ask Ray about this further? I guess not. Thank you, Ray. So at this time, we have an executive session item on the agenda. Do I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters relating to a current investigation or matters that may lead to the appointment, demotion, discipline, or suspension of a particular person? We'll have such a motion. Who was that? Thank you. And second?
I'll second. Amanda Souza.
Thank you. So I'll call on you to vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Bieber.
Fred Bieber, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings.
Gettings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd.
Ken Kidd, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Souza.
Aye. Amanda Souza, aye.
Thank you. So the motion passes. So if you're not a subcommittee member or staff, you will now be leaving the meeting. Streaming will be paused.
Yes, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the streaming. I just have to wait till everyone is out of the attendee list, and then I'll let you know when it's okay to proceed. But if everyone could mute their camera or their microphones at the moment so nothing is said inadvertently, that would be wonderful. And I'll let you know as soon as we're ready. Just waiting for it to catch up. One moment.
Thank you.
We're good to go.
Okay, Dr. Ware, we can proceed. We're back in open session.
Thank you. So we are back in open session. The subcommittee received information about a complaint and voted to request more information. So the next meeting of the committee will be on February the 5th, 2021, and it'll be virtually again. So I want just like to thank my fellow committee members and staff people for bearing with us in a long meeting today under the continuing situation of meeting virtually. We appreciate the support we've got from you all. At this point, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved. Second Gettings.
Same thing. And do I have a second?
Seconded, Allison Eastman.
Thank you. And I'll ask you to vote. In turn, my vote is aye. Dr. Bieber.
Fred Bieber, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd. Dr. Kidd.
You're on mute, Dr. Kidd.
Sorry about that. Ken Kidd, aye.
And Dr. Smith and Souza have left us. So thank you all. That concludes the meeting. We'll see you in 3 months' time and stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.